Okay. So hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us this week. The speaker for this week's virtual meetup will be André Santos, and the talk will be about Javardise, a projectional code editor for Java. André Santos is an assistant professor at the University Institute of Lisbon in Portugal, where he teaches courses on programming and software engineering, and his research interests relate to tools for addressing human aspects in software development, both for educational purposes and professional practice. I will leave you the stage, and thank you for joining us today.
All right, can you hear me okay? Is it fine? So let's, I suppose I can share some slides, right? Okay, so you should be able to see the slides. Let's see how it faces. Well, thanks a lot for this opportunity. I think it's really nice initiative from Strumenta. And I've attended a few talks before, not many because this semester I have a schedule conflict, but from January I plan to be a more regular attendee. Okay, so I'll just give you a bit of talk, then a bit of demo, then a bit of talk, and let's see how this goes. So as you can see from the title, this is about a code editor for Java and in a projectional style. From the topic talks and some names I know here, I think most people here are familiar with projectional code editor, but still, like, I will give a bit of a glimpse over that in the introduction. Okay, first of all, this work I'm presenting was first presented 2 years ago at this programming experience workshop, which is part of the programming conference. It's a really nice conference that is more academic, but yes, they have a big concern with practical and connection to industry. So it's a really nice conference. I really recommend. And this workshop gave me good feedback to this project. Then for numerous reasons, I got this a bit idle. And now in the last months, I came back to it. So that's why I'm giving this talk. Okay. Before talking about projectional, let me tell you about this structured code editor. I put the D in brackets because in some parts you see structured code editor or structured code editors, but that doesn't really matter much now. And so this kind of editor, there is no precise definition of what it is, but when you read attempts of doing this, I see it as some interaction facility that will disallow you to have malformed code. So the code you are editing is always at any moment parsable, or almost at every moment parsable. So you don't get any syntax errors or lexical, and the grammar always takes what your program. Okay, and then because what you are describing is always well formed, the visualization is always well indented and consistent because the structure is always correct. As a consequence, your editing effort regarding formatting should get reduced because you don't have to worry much about these formatting issues. And then these editors, they often have some specialized editing commands because you're not typing like free text, and those commands will allow you to transform the code, but while maintaining the well-formedness of the code. Okay. It happens that this idea it's kind of older than me. It goes back to the 80s. I've got two shots here. So one is even from 79. I could not find the picture of the prototype, but it was an initiative of Cornell, some sort of structured editor. This is a screenshot from the paper. They are describing that the places. Can you see my mouse, by the way? Can you see the mouse? Okay. The places where they have this underscore is like where the cursor stops when they're navigating and where you can input stuff. So this was already a kind of structured editor. And then this line of research had a considerable role at Carnegie Mellon University during the 80s. So they had a series of prototypes. Well, the first one was called GNOME, and then Gandalf, and then there was this Pascal Jenny. It was already at more advanced stages, but it was the one I got a screenshot for. So this was a structured editor for Pascal that also constrains your actions and has ways to collapse things, etc. So this idea is not new, but somehow, like from the 90s on, somehow lost a bit of interest. And in one way, people are complaining, okay, this is nice in some form, but then when you want to edit things and things don't work, then it just gets you a bit in the way. Or you had to make editors that are very specialized, that require to understand a lot of specific commands. And somehow this lost a bit popularity. Meanwhile, the normal IDEs, the other editors were getting better and better. And so maybe that was also a reason to discontinue this idea. But then lately, there is, I see a growing interest on this method. If you look at modern IDEs, they are somehow projectional, but it's only in one way. So we, as who write the code, we type text freely, okay? Although IDEs, they generate a lot of stuff for us and autocomplete things, you can still type freely. But then what you're typing is constantly being parsed to some AST, so the code representation in memory. And then that information is used to give you assistance. And also when there is refactoring operations, okay, you refactor at the AST, and then you project back to the code. So in some ways, projectional just in the code generation part, not the code writing part. Then the problem starts when you have not well-formed programs, and then of course you can still parse and get some incomplete AST or some AST with some heuristics, but then this is where things start to work not as good. All right, so now I would go for a quick first demo of that the editor that you've seen in the title. So let me share another window. Okay, you should be seeing it by now. I should also say that my research purpose with this kind of editor, it started and it still is mostly from an educational point of view, but I think that there is some opportunities for going beyond that. But so far, I've been mostly focusing on that part. So how does this look like? I've increased the font a little bit. Is it readable here? Okay. So the idea is that we have something that looks and feels as much as possible as a text editor. So I'm going to do this classical class. Yeah, so I start typing stuff here. Okay. And if I would not tell you anything, you probably think it's a normal editor. But in fact, this tokens and all the navigation is structured. Okay. And I'm going to do some constructor here. And so you see that it is imposing some structure, right? And although it feels very, at least from a looking point of view, looks very similar. Of course, I don't have to type the semicolons and the bracket. I didn't type any brackets so far. Okay. And then a characteristic of this editor is that, okay, if I want to mess up with some stuff, put some brackets out of place, it's just impossible. Okay, if I cannot do, well, I could move this bracket somehow, but I cannot do much with this. Let me just type one more thing. Let's say, sorry for not being very original. Yeah, so I just typed it. You've probably seen now, like when I left this stuff. Okay, if this text would go onto the compiler, it would not parse, right? Well, return would parse, sorry. But if I would have some, let's say, some like this, yeah, having this kind of holes doesn't work, right? So we have, here is when things start to look a little bit different because you can't really type this. So, but later on, I will show you how to handle these situations. Let me just do the thing back. Okay, what else? There is another particular case, which is, so I'm restricting what you can type, but at some moments you have to give a bit extra freedom. For example, so if I'm typing a simple expression, okay, I have to allow some numbers, but then either I would really be really strict in restricting what you can type, because I'm restricting what characters you can put here, but in some situations you might end up with a token that is not correct, like this one, and so the editor is marking that you can't have that. Later on, I will show you how I handle these things. Okay, and then the idea that this just feels like a normal editor. Then there is some like little things, like, for example, if I change the class name, it keeps the constructor coherent, and I didn't implement it yet, but I could do the same with parameters and all that. But I think that's not so impressive. Let me tell you, this is an ongoing prototype. This probably will crash at some point, so just a warning. Okay, so this was the kind of the first quick demo. Then I will show a few more constructs later on. Okay, so now I will bring the projectional term. And why do I separate from the notion of structured? Because you could have something that is structured with some specialized UIs that don't have a model underneath. Probably would be a bit clumsy implementation, but it's possible to do it. And for example, those initial prototypes, they don't talk about this projectional thing. So they are just focusing on what kind of interaction capability they provide. But if we do it the projectional way, in fact, there's a central artifact, which is the model of the thing we are representing. In this case, the model of the program we are describing. And because the program is in some language, it has some constructs, we have to have also a model of the language constructs. Often you can hear this term meta model. Some cases you can also think it as a grammar. So this model has to obey to some model that describes the language. Okay, and then when we do our editor, the editor is basically rendering the model. And whenever the model changes, you get those changes reflected back into the editor. And then you can also send in commands to change the model and in turn update the view. And we never manipulate textual code, text directly. So whenever we need the text, for example, for compilation or to transform to some other artifacts, then that comes from it's an output of the model. Okay, it's like also a view of the model, something you produce out of the model. Okay, and so this is the kind of architecture I followed. And now a bit of technology. So I've used JavaParser as the meta model for the language constructs. I know some people here know JavaParser very well. So then I've used SWT, which is Eclipse UI toolkit for the view. And although these are two Java frameworks, I've glued this with Kotlin. Okay, and that's very smooth in terms of Kotlin. It's really nice to, if you have other bits of Java, it's just like you almost don't feel it. Doing the reverse is not as nice, but if it's just Kotlin consuming, that's really fine. Okay, what else to say here? Well, so in maybe some other people can have different visions here, but projectional editing is basically doing MVC at a particular scale. So it may look harder than the conventional UI MVC, but in fact it's the same thing. The problem is like we're dealing with some structures that have many constructs, have a lot of nested and recursive structures and a lot of details, and that makes it much more challenging than the, let's say, bread and butter MVC. But I think that's what is happening here. So let me detail a little bit of this. So as I said, I'm using JavaParser as the model, which will give me the program in terms of an abstract syntax tree. So from the source, you get the tree into the memory, and then you can change and get back the Java. Not surprisingly, So the JavaParser offers some infrastructure for visitors. Okay, so this is it's very standard in this kind of tree processing things. You know, until R and C, they all have this visitor or kind of visitor thing. So when I was choosing JavaParser, I was like, I was taking for granted that they have something like that, and indeed they had. But then a bit more surprisingly, sorry, I forgot to put the timer. When did I start talking? Was 10 minutes, 5 minutes ago? Anyway, you'll let me know if I'm taking too long.
We are not super strict on time.
Okay, fine. As I said, JavaParser also offers, for me, it was a bit of a surprise, this observing infrastructure. So you can register listeners or observers, or you want to call it, for changes in the model and then get events back. This was really a nice surprise, because first I thought it was not there, because, you know, I thought, okay, reengineering library was something to work offline, not for interactive systems. I was like, well, they have observers, great. I was already thinking about having to implement some sort of observing layer, but then, well, it's already there. A minor thing was that I found a bit not usual was that the observer events, they are fired before the modifications and not after. And somehow I was used to the other way, and so at some points it created a little hassle. But yeah, I could get around with this. Then concerning the view, so basically I have many widgets specialized for some AST nodes. For example, I could have, if I'm representing a binary expression, you know, with some operator and two expressions, I might have a widget for the whole binary expression, which then has widgets for the left and right sides. And these widgets have to, well, they depend on the nodes they are displaying, rendering, so they have to read their properties and then, you know, get their shape according to that. They register observers so that when this changes, they can change. And then when there is some modification in the AST, events are fired and we can update the views. Okay, this is also very MVC-ish. One important thing is that widgets should not modify AST directly. Okay, as in many cases when we do MVC. Okay, model, views, of course, we need the controller. In this case, for this kind of application, the controller of the code editor is mostly to you know, centralize the command stack so that you can have undo, which is essential in this kind of tool, right? So a user will interact with the components, keystrokes, etc. Some of them will trigger commands. This goes up to the centralized command stack, which in turn coordinates the execution of the commands that will modify the AST. And when you get that modification, we get updates and our view looks different. If you every command has some undo, has the do command and the undo part. So whenever we want to undo, we go to command stack and then we run the undo of that last command, which will change the AST and we get the events back again. Okay, so yeah, for me, the experience of building this editor was basically doing MVC, but with a lot of details. Okay, so right now I would go for another bit of demo. Where's the window? The window. Did I lost it or what? Just not finding the window that I was showing you. Oh, it's here. Okay. Okay, can you see the editor now? Yeah, I guess so. Because the Zoom sometimes, you know, I lost the highlights and stuff. You don't really know if you're showing the right thing. Okay, so right now let me open this little test and do another function. Okay, now I'll go for again, I'm using this for teaching, so my example is mostly this introductory programming things. But let's say I'm a beginner student, I'm doing this summation function, okay? And now during this example, I will just on purpose cause some situations to illustrate what is happening under the hood, okay? As I will discuss in the end, so the really challenging part with the structured editors is the editing and modifying part. So because if you just type everything straight and it goes, okay, there is some challenges, but that's doable. But then allowing like this fine-grained modifications, I found that was really the hardest part. So I'll just show some examples. So for example, I could just start typing, okay, I need a variable I, okay. But then I said, someone says, well, but you need to declare it, okay. So ideally, I mean, okay, I could delete it and do the declaration, but that's not the ideal editing experience. So I have to have ways to transform one type of statement into the other. So the fact that I allow to write here and then type space and he divides the type and the name, I transform what was an assignment into a declaration, okay? But this was done in a way that you barely understand. I was just typing, as you would probably do, but in fact, there was an AST node that changed, so the assignment was replaced by declaration. Again, let's say I'm a beginning student, so I'm just doing things like, okay, I just did the if instead of while, but I'll go back to that typo. And now I'm doing, let's say, now I'm doing another mistake. So I say, okay, sum is equal to sum plus array I, okay. So now I have the reverse thing. I would need to, convert this into normal assignment, okay. Also AST transformation, and of course I would need to get the variable. Okay. Now what else? Again, I'm still a beginner, so okay, I learned about this I++ out of place, so I have a few problems. So first problem, okay, this is not let's say the I++ should go inside, right? Okay, I could do copy paste, but now I will start digging into little things that you don't have in a normal editor. So in this case, I have the notion of moving. So because the cursor is always in a well-defined widget, I can easily have like moving around operations. So in this case, I'm doing a special keystroke like command and hitting down to say that I want to move the bracket down. Okay, but this has in fact picked the I++ statement and move it inside the if body. Okay. Yeah, so I could do this kind of moves, and all this is AST thing. And now, of course, I have this wrong, and I would like to transform this into a while. Okay. If I'm doing text editor, it's trivial. It's one keyword by the other. But here, because if it's its own type of node, in fact, I need to transform the node of if to a node of while with exactly the same body. Okay. And if you don't have that kind of command, it will be really annoying to having to type and then copy paste some part. So in this case, I have some transformation. It changed the whole structure to another structure. Yeah, and then at some point I would have to return something. Okay. What else of more, let's say, specific commands? So when I want to delete, so I'm just hitting backspace and deleting stuff. Okay. But then, for example, if I get to a nested structure like the while, I have two ways of deleting. I can do the deep delete, okay, which would be like the whole block goes away. Some bug there, sorry. Or I could have the shallow delete, which means, okay, I want to get rid of the while, but not the contents inside. So now I'm going to do the shallow delete. So it's different keystrokes, and I keep the body, okay? And situations like that, I mean, I'm still exploring what kind of commands without going into very specific things, learning special keystrokes. I want to keep this as minimal, but this design trade-off is not obvious, okay? But I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. All right, so now I planned to go back to the slides. So, by the way, you can, I think it's, now I get the opening. I mean, it's if you want to ask any questions at any point, you can just do them. Feel free.
There are some questions in the chat, so I will just.
I'm not, okay.
We can repeat some of them.
Okay, but do you want to lead that process?
Otherwise, yeah, you can go along and read them. I just because the chat is a bit full, and I just
Okay.
some of them. So
okay, but
yeah,
shall we leave this question answer more to the end? I meant just like some spontaneous question, you know, on something I'm saying, just Christoph, because I see some are like more comments, others are yeah, others are actual questions. But okay, we can leave this to the discussion. Okay, so back to the slides. Yeah, so now I'll just show you some tricks or little details to get this stuff working. Okay, now the first one is that everything I've seen some MPS comments in the when I was going through the chat. So I'm always serializing to code. So whenever I save the thing, I get the code, and then if you load it, you get it back. So there's no special way of serializing. I think this might be a disadvantage in some point, but in others it's certainly an advantage because you have regular code you can edit somewhere else. Now let me show you some internal details. So I've shown you this stuff with the holes, and because I want to have something that always parses, in fact we have to do some trick, which is to put some special identifier placeholder to denote, okay, there's something missing there. So whenever I find this kind of ID in the AST, I'm just rendering it as a node, but underneath there is always something there. And the other case you've seen in the demo was that when we make some typo we cannot resolve, I use the same trick, but I also attach a comment so that you don't lose what was being typed there. Okay, this one is a bit more tricky, but these things, if you save, you can still get exactly what you had. So this is for holes in expressions, so to say. Then now it's a bit more of a not open question, but like, yeah, question to the audience. Like, there is a major design challenge related to the formatting aspects. Okay, because we can, when we are writing code, for the same kind of constructs. So think about nested if-else's versus else if, or chain method calls in different lines on the same line. So you're just typing the same thing, but you have a different style, and some people are really keen on keeping a certain style. But because some of these things, they have exactly the same representation in the AST, it gets challenging to, like, should you allow the different types? How are you going to communicate that? How do you serialize that? And so whenever I come into these points, I always get a bit unsure, like it remains like some open question in this kind of development. For example, also the empty lines, I mean, they are important for code readability, but they are not in the AST. And so if you want to keep them, I know JavaParser has some stuff to serialize back with the same formatting, but because I'm loading these changes into the editor, it's not easy to use that feature. So how am I handling the empty lines? Well, I'm doing with empty statements. Okay, this now starts to get a little bit more, let's say, hacky somehow. But in terms of the implementation, it simplifies a lot of things, because if I'm treating these empty lines as empty statement, it's a statement like any other statement which is in the AST. So everything that has to do with the manipulation, it can be done like easily, like any other statement. Further, if we have attached comments, they are also easier to manage because as the people here we are experts in the JavaParser, they have a way to recover comments, but it's always a point of uncertainty. Where do I attach the comment and so on? And like this, if I have a loose line comment, in fact, is an empty statement with an attached comment, and so it's easier to manipulate. But of course, like when you look at the serialized code, it's already getting a bit into the hacky form. But I believe it's still tolerable. I mean, assuming that you're just editing your stuff with the same editor, so you're not gonna ever need to deal with these semicolons all over the place. Another aspect regarding the AST, which is a bit inconvenient in the implementation, is that the AST is not always the most clean abstraction. So it's mostly clean, but in some parts, at least to my taste, I would like that they would be that the AST would be a bit different. So let me give you an example. So if I have this if something and then expression assignment statements, this goes into the AST as a if statement node, and then it has the contents, not the condition, but the contents is an expression statement. But if I have this other code, which is exactly the same, really the same conceptually and at all levels, then I get a different tree. Okay, it's only a bit different, but if your editor, when you are implementing the if manipulation, you have to always handle the two cases, and it just creates one more thing to worry about. Okay. So when I was implementing this, so I take the Java code, goes to JavaParser, I get the AST, and then I do some they're really minor tweaks that, at least at this point of my development, they facilitate the implementation of the editor. So they reduce the details to worry about. Okay. Java, it's a language with very big syntax, many syntactical possibilities, and then like when you want to cover all that in detail, it really gets to be a lot of work. And because I was mostly focusing on the basic constructs, then yeah, I could skip over these things because my main concern is the elementary programming. So what are these tunings? Well, one of them is that I'm transforming all the control structures if they have single statement, they become with a block, and then I just take that for granted in my editor. Okay. Eventually, I could implement the other way that supports it too, but it was just a way to simplify the development at this point without losing expressiveness. The second case is that I'm not, well, to avoid having to support multi-line variable declarations like the one you see here, I'm expanding all these to single var declarations, which express the same thing. This one actually would not be that hard to support, but I had to make options and choose where to focus. So if I find multi-line declarations, I just expand them to single line, and my editor only supports single line. You probably would find, so far this is the only things I'm doing, but maybe if I go into the nitty-gritty details of the language, maybe I would have to do some other simplifications. Okay, now how is our time? Past 4. I think I'm still, do I have another 10 minutes or is it okay, organizers? Okay, so I will just show you a quick another part of demo. Okay, just to highlight. So as what I've been showing now is just like I'm doing with this kind of editor what you would do with a normal editor. It's just like the editing feel is a bit different. Okay, but I think the potential of this kind of editors really start to appear when you try to have different views of the code. So like specialized views that isolate some parts because of some characteristics. So I'll give you some examples just to as a teaser. This is not very well developed yet, but I can already communicate something. So, for example, we have this Java doesn't have this notion of static class. So you can make classes just with static methods, but there is not a construct for that. But some of them, in fact, is what we want. So we could have, like, if you notice the extension here, sJava. So what this editor is doing, okay, if this has the extension sJava, let's treat this class as a class only with static methods. So I just see the method headers here, so it's the same stuff as you had, as I shown before. But in fact, what is being edited is a regular class with all these static methods. So I'm just giving a bit of a specialized view. As another example, I have this case, this one that I have this fJava extension, which is also in static mode, like the other one. But because I've implemented the support for the different statements in a modular way, so I can plug and unplug certain features. So in this mode of editing, let's call it, will be the functional mode. So there is no change of state. So I just support if-elses and calls, returns, and also declarations, but there is no assignment or loops. So now this doesn't work. So the editor was launched in a mode with certain features. So I can still do the ones I'm allowed to, but not the loops and all that. So if I type while and stuff, it just doesn't recognize. Okay, so it's like unplugging and plugging features. Okay, and I have more ideas on this, but they are so sketchy that I'm even a bit afraid of demoing them. But just to give you a glimpse, I envision a way to have a view specialized for documentation, where you're adding the documentation isolatedly externally to the class, and you keep all in sync because it's all views of the same model. Also views for testing, well, and so on. If you're interested, I can also share those ideas. But let me go back to the slides and start heading towards the conclusion. Okay, I think I shared this wrong. No, Kitalk. Okay, that's right. Okay, just give you a quick idea of the dimension. Of course, lines of code don't tell everything, but so this thing I've been showing you is around 7K lines of code plus JavaParser. Okay, so if you are doing this stuff and you don't have the model part implemented, then you have to also do it on your own. So 7K is not too small, it's not too big. It's yeah, I think up to 10K, I could have an editor that covers, I'm not going to say all, but most of Java. So right now, like, I'm not covering lambdas and annotations, but those two I think will be easy to add. And all the other constructs, I have them, most of them, they are done. Of course, it needs polishing and all that, but it's not that much of implementation effort. So, and then I have like these 40, 50 classes. Some of them are just generic UI widgets that I had to adapt, so they are not specific to Java, but then still the vast majority, they are Java specific, so they are the viewers for the AST nodes of Java. Now, to conclude some kind of lessons learned in this process. So first, the pinky part. What was easier was like doing views that are read-only, even if they react to events. It's relatively straightforward. Of course, it's work, but I found this not too troublesome. And then once you have the MVC working well, like adding new commands that just work on the model and then everything just works, it's really nice. It's really rewarding. But then you have to have all the infrastructure well done for this to work seamlessly. And then, of course, to all this, I mean, having a solid model infrastructure is really crucial. And my first prototype, I was doing the model a bit on my own, and because it was just like a first attempt, and then I needed some feature I add to the model, and then I mean there was a lack of solidity in this part, and that gave me a lot of problem. But with JavaParser, this ended up being quite nice. Now the downsides, the pain points. Having a good editing usability, it's really hard. It's a lot of details to handle. These things with the focus, where the focus goes when you create cursor positioning, it's like a lot of details, which are like they when you have them working well, it looks simple, but it took a lot of trials and iterations to get it. Some structures are harder than what they seem. So if else is something basic in programming. But then if we look at the implementation of the if else widget, because the else is part of if, but it's optional, and then but is inserted as if it was a statement. And yeah, for example, the for loop, you have all these 3 components and they are all optional. You can write, and then one is multivariable, multi-instruction. And if getting all these editing things right, it's a lot of work. But by far the part that I found, at least to my capabilities, the part that I found more challenging was to design how to handle the creation and modification of expressions. This was the things that I had to iterate the design more, and was not as obvious as, for example, doing the structure of the statements. And yeah, I think that's what I had to say. Okay, I think I stayed in kind of 40 minutes or so, and I'll be really happy to take questions, comments, suggestions. I can also start looking at the chat. Maybe really a lot of text.
Recording.
Sorry?
So stop the recording now.
Okay.
So we can ask